Live from Downing Street, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe as we wait for Andy Burnham to walk through the door behind me as the UK's next Prime Minister. I'm Lizzie Burden and these are your top stories. Andy Burnham's promise of hope and unity. The new UK Prime Minister is set to deliver a message of optimism from Downing Street today, but questions remain over policy priorities and the makeup of his cabinet. Brent, meanwhile, climbs above $90 a barrel as the US and Iran exchange fresh strikes. Tensions escalating after the deaths of US troops in the region. And as the Farnborough Air Show begins, the race for aircraft orders heats up. We'll hear from the Boeing CEO later this morning, and in just a few minutes, we'll talk earnings with the CFO of budget carrier Ryanair. Well, a very good morning. Checking in on these markets this Monday, and we begin in the cross-asset picture. As the US-Iran attacks escalate, we have oil jumping to its highest in more than a month. As you can see, Brent above $90 a barrel, bonds falling on renewed inflation concerns, though Japan is on holiday, so there's no trade in cash treasuries. We look elsewhere to the long end of the Australian yield curve this morning, and the dollar trading in a narrow range again as we mind those tensions in the Middle East. Now flipping to the stock picture, and we are mostly treading water as things stand. The Kospi is seeing some action after Friday's holiday. It's down about 5% this morning, but the MSCI Asia Pacific Index not doing much, nor are Euro Stoxx 50 futures up 0.2%. And we have US futures pointing higher, a slight bounce back after Friday's sell-off. Those are your markets. Let's set you up for the day ahead. We begin with former Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, set to become Britain's 7th Prime Minister in a decade today, after an extraordinary bloodless coup in the Labour Party. Today, we'll expect the choreography with which we've become all too familiar in recent years. Outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer will give a farewell speech here late morning before leaving for Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation to King Charles. And once that's accepted, the King will invite Burnham to form a government. Then, in brutally quick succession, Burnham will head back here for a speech outside that black door at around lunchtime before ministers start arriving for cabinet appointments. So a lot of questions about who will make the team sheet, as well as the policy direction that Burnham will pursue. Let's get more now with our Bloomberg opinion columnist Rosa Prince. She joined me here in Downing Street. So, Rosa, we know that Andy Burnham's all about optimism. That's what he brings with him from up north. Is that going to evaporate the moment he crosses the threshold and reality hits?
As you say, I think life gets very real for Andy Burnham in a couple of hours. I always think the most sobering moment is when he gets in there and he's going to get the nuclear codes. He's going to have to write a message for what should be done in the event of a nuclear attack on Britain if he's incapacitated. And then he's going to have to draw up that cabinet, make that really decisive choice of who his Chancellor is going to be. And then it just keeps coming thick and fast, the global outlook, the economic outlook. Yeah, quite a big day for Andy Burnham.
You mentioned the pick for Chancellor. He's already caught between the soft left, the so-called soft left of his party, and the markets.
Now, he could surprise us, but it seems to have come down to a choice between Ed Miliband, currently the Energy Secretary, who is on that soft left, and the so-called fiscal hawk. That's how she's described herself, Shabana Mahmood. Much less experience of economics. She hasn't worked in the Treasury before, unlike Mr Miliband. And I think that'll be quite a kind of defining moment for Mr Burnham's new cabinet. Which way will he go? What message does he want to send to the markets? And what will the response be if he does take that gamble on Ed Miliband, who is his close friend, who I think had assumed he would become the Chancellor?
OK, Rosa, for now, thank you very much. We'll come back to Rosa later on in the programme. That's Rosa Prince, our Bloomberg opinion columnist. Now, let's take a closer look at how traders will likely respond to Burnham. We can bring in Ben Ram, cross-asset strategist at Bloomberg MLive. Ben, good morning. What sort of announcements today, and in the days ahead, of course, would boost gilts and sterling? A lot's been priced in, but what fresh catalysts would actually make a difference?
Morning, Lizzie. As you've been discussing, it's going to come down to immediately, at least, to the choice of the Chancellor, because we know very little about what will come after that. But the choice of the Chancellor, I mean, if it's going to be Ed Miliband, the markets may not like it, as the previous guest was saying. And I think that, at the moment, if you look at the gilt positioning, I think that gilts are kind of wary of what will happen, but they're not a whole lot... And they're not a whole lot jittery. They haven't sold off to the extent that one would have imagined. But even so, it is important to keep in mind that the 10-year gilt yield is hovering around 5%, and the 30-year gilt yield is now just off a few basis points off record not seen in this millennium. So I think that, the choice of the Chancellor is going to be a determinant. And I think that gilts are already trading at a considerable discount to treasuries, so that's going to be a guiding factor, albeit keep in mind that the pound hasn't really handicapped the Burnham government yet, meaning it has been resilient. So we'll have to wait and watch to see who the Chancellor is going to be and what their policies will be.
And that fiscal positioning only going to potentially add to the squeeze on Burnham, as we've seen for his predecessors. Ben, thank you very much. That's Ben Ram, our cross-asset strategist at Bloomberg Live. Now, let's check in on what's already happening in the markets this morning. We could go straight to Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Winnie, what are you watching for us?
Yeah, good morning, Lizzie. We are seeing oil prices climbing back up as tensions continue to escalate in the Middle East. We are looking at Brent crude here up about 2.4% to trade above $90 per barrel. Now, this is around its highest level in about a month. We did see those gains pairing just a little bit in the morning as investors say that this is not yet just becoming a full-blown war, but still lots of uncertainty when it comes to how much further cargoes will be able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and we are seeing some impact on the yields already, with the Australia and New Zealand yields a bit higher, while the markets in Japan are closed. Asian energy stocks also higher on that front. Now we flip the board and take a look at the broader impact, because it is keeping sentiment capped in Asian markets. While on one hand we are seeing Kospi here leading the clients down about 4% after stocks coming back from a holiday on Friday. A bit of a catch down there as we really saw that big tech sell-off on Friday. However, on the other hand, we are seeing gains in the HS Tech, and that is really driven by this big question investors are now asking, whether these cheaper and more efficient models from China, especially after the likes of Moonshot's K3 model, if those raise the questions around those massive spendings that we are seeing from the US hyperscalers, especially ahead of their earnings, and if those raise questions around how solid the AI, the hardware demand is still for the chip stocks. Now, you flip the board, we take a closer look at these tech names in China, because leading gains today, in fact, is Alibaba, up about 5%. Also coming after the company previewed the latest flagship model of Quen, and saying that it is just second to Anthropic's model on Fable 5. So that is really raising expectation of how far these developments in the Chinese AI names are. However, on the flip side, you are seeing these Chinese independent AI labs, the likes of Zhipu and Minimax, doing very badly because of those expected competition, and that they have to be able to raise their capabilities as well to match those expectations. Back to you, Lizzie.
Winnie, thank you very much. That's Bloomberg's Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Well, let's take a look at the risk events on the docket for this week that could change that picture in markets. On Wednesday, we've got a double bill of Mag 7 earnings, both Tesla and Alphabet reporting. Then on Thursday, we have the ECB decision, a hold expected, but perhaps we get more hints around a September hike. And then on Friday, some actual data when it comes to the Eurozone. It's the flash PMI readings. Now, in a moment, we're going to be bringing you a conversation with the Ryanair CFO, Neil Sorahan, off the back of the budget airline's first quarter earnings. So let's just dive into what they have reported. Of course, summer demand very much in focus amid the Iran war's impact on air travel, and a lot of questions about how Ryanair is going to be affected by the EasyJet takeover. So Ryanair reporting profit dropping 34% in its first fiscal quarter as the conflict hikes the price of oil. Profit after tax coming in at €538 million. That's down from €820 million, missing estimates of about €624 million. And Ryanair saying that the conflict's led to consumer hesitancy, later bookings, all of this amid concerns around jet fuel shortages. So that interview with the Ryanair CFO coming up. Don't go anywhere. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Well, we are here in Downing Street as Andy Burnham prepares to become UK Prime Minister. But as we wait, let's turn back to earnings now. Ryanair says that profit dropped by 34% in its first fiscal quarter as the Middle East conflict hikes the price of oil and dents consumers' desire to travel. Let's get more now with Anna Edwards. She's in our London studio with the CFO. Anna.
Lizzie, good morning. Nice to see you outside Downing Street. I'm joined here in the studio by Ryanair's CFO, as you say, Neil Sorahan. Neil, really nice to speak to you as ever. I'll start with the big stories around the Ryanair numbers, and the first that stands out to me on the Bloomberg terminal is that the profit after tax numbers come in at €538 million. That seems a little light compared to comparisons. There's a lot of moving parts this quarter. So what can you tell us about your performance against market expectations?
Yeah, well, market expectations based on company consensus was somewhere close to about 579. We come in at 538. I think with all of the moving parts with the conflict in the Middle East, people found it difficult to model what the fuel figure would be on the 20% unhedged. But a strong performance on the cost side within the business. You know, we were 80% hedged on our jet fuel at $67 a barrel, hedged out to the end of this financial year, the end of March. Unit cost ex-fuel put in a very strong performance. Ancillaries, all of the teas and coffees, reserved seats, priority boarding, €24 per passenger, flat. So the conflict in the Middle East was the key mover off the numbers year on year, where we saw some consumer hesitancy. That led to closer in bookings and lower fares.
Okay. And we'll come to that consumer hesitancy in a moment, but just to linger on the oil price story, as you say, 80% hedged, but the oil price does seem to have hurt you in the first quarter, as it's hurt in the first period of the year, as it's hurt many airline businesses. So what is the jet fuel situation now in terms of the prices you're paying and the availability? How do you sum that up for us?
Well, on the availability, there's no shortage of fuel. There hasn't been any shortage of fuel. I think there was some concerns about that earlier on in the year. No difficulty at all on that front. As I said, very well hedged at $67 a barrel, 80% of our fuel hedged, but importantly, 90% of our dollar requirements hedged out to the end of this year at 115. The 20% unhedged, we don't know where it'll go. It had dipped after the MOU was signed. We were already hedging into FY28 since the conflict escalated. Over the past couple of weeks, the price has spiked again. I think it's over 90 on Brent, which means it's well over $100 a barrel on jet fuel this morning. But we're better hedged than everybody else. I think a lot of capacity is going to come out of the market this winter, and I think inevitably you may see some airlines go to the wall.
Okay, and let me ask you about the demand story then. We've seen some customer hesitancy in the first quarter, understandably around the war, and lots of other airlines talking about that as well. Are you going to have to try to stimulate demand? Is that going? And you've been doing a bit of that, I suppose. But is that going to have to continue?
I think it's at a slightly lower level. You know, we're talking about the trend into Q2 being modestly down. That's a low single-digit number. It could be better, could be slightly worse. It all very much depends on the close-in bookings into August and September, and unfortunately with people booking that little bit later, we don't have huge visibility on that at this point in time.
Any sense that people are booking a little further ahead? You know, they changed their behaviour when the war started, booked very last minute. Any sense that that's changing at all?
I think they're hoping to get a bargain at the last minute, but the reality is if you book close in, you're going to pay up. So my advice to everybody this morning is to book now as quickly as possible, or you're going to end up paying significantly higher fares closer in.
Yeah, you said this morning you're not giving any guidance because you have no visibility. What is it in particular you can't see?
It would be unusual for us to give guidance this early in the year in any event, but we've even a little bit less visibility and a lot of uncertainty around the 20% unhedged fuel. I mean, we would typically give profit after tax guidance in our Q3s. It's our Q1 numbers.
Yeah.
So it's far too early to give that.
A few other things I just wanted to ask you about then, Neil. One of them is, obviously, we've seen a bidding war taking place for one of your rivals, for EasyJet. What do you think is going to be the end result here? Is EasyJet going to remain what it is right now, do you think? What are you planning for in terms of the competitive environment?
I think, we've been talking about consolidation in this industry for many years. We think ultimately we'll end up with 4 large players, with Ryanair being the key point-to-point and 3 flag carriers remaining as the key players. It's inevitable. I think that happens within the sector. Whether it's Apollo or Castlelake or somebody else buys EasyJet, capacity, to my mind, will come out. I think some of the assets will be used for other purposes.
Benefit, you think?
I think ultimately, consumers are going to see pricing going up. We're going to see capacity coming out of the market, and I don't think this will be the last of the consolidation. I think this will actually probably push further consolidation within the sector. There's already a number of weaker carriers who are struggling with fuel at the levels they're at. They're not very well hedged. They don't have the dollar cover in place. I think you'll see some casualties on that front as well.
I can ask you about the window incident recently, a Ryanair jet with a broken window. What does that mean for the business? There were all kinds of reports about maybe something had fallen off the engine and that had hit the fuselage. What can you confirm to us you know, and what kind of regulatory pressure are you under as a result?
We welcome the appointment of the US National Transport Safety Board, the NTSB, who've been appointed to carry out a full independent investigation in relation to this. I think it would be wrong for me to speculate on what may or may not have happened. They'll ultimately get to the root cause of the incident. What I can say is that our crew did a phenomenal job in very difficult operational circumstances on the day. The training kicked in and thankfully they were able to return to Thessaloniki and everybody walked off the aircraft. I think that's the key.
And you've been, in terms of costs, we started the conversation talking about costs. You've been looking at your tax base, I know. Are you done with the sort of redrawing of the map to respond to higher taxes in places like Germany, Austria, Spain?
No, we will continue to churn our very scarce capacity. We're only growing by 4% this year. We're only growing by 3% next year. So we see opportunities to lock in lower costs where governments are stimulating growth, whether through lower fees, lower ATC, removing aviation taxes. Then we will obviously follow that opportunity.
Yeah. Lizzie Burnham's in Downing Street. Any message for a new Prime Minister, Neil, in the UK?
I think he has a phenomenal opportunity to grow tourism and to grow jobs in the UK by getting rid of APD in the first week in office.
We will see what he says. Neil, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Neil Sorahan, the Ryanair CFO. Lizzie.
Neil, I'll let him know when he arrives later on. Anna, thank you so much for that conversation. Really interesting to hear that Neil Sorahan thinks that there is more capacity to come out of the market. There's no shortage on jet fuel. And staying with aviation, Guy Johnson is going to be speaking to the Boeing CEO, Kelly Ortberg, live from the Farnborough Air Show. So don't miss that conversation as well, just after 9 a.m. UK time. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We're here on Downing Street as Andy Burnham prepares to become the UK Prime Minister. Of course, foreign policy will not be able to be avoided by this Prime Minister, even if he would like to focus on the domestic agenda. And speaking of which, The US and Iran have over the weekend been trading fresh attacks. Washington announcing a third troop death in just 2 days. Oil is higher on increased tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, with the IRGC Navy vowing not to allow any vessels to pass through without permission. Tehran says that it will no longer adhere to the terms of the peace deal, while President Trump says that the conflict is about ending Iran's nuclear ambitions.
This is a far bigger job that we're doing. We were doing a little job of stopping them from having a certain capability. Now we're just ending it. So it's really not the same thing. What we're doing now is we're ending any chance where they can have a nuclear missile.
For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Paul Wallace. Paul, that was President Trump. Iran, for its part, says that the ceasefire has effectively collapsed. Just bring us up to speed on the weekend's attacks.
Lizzie, well, last night we had the 9th consecutive day of US strikes on Iran. Again, mostly on southern Iran, mostly on military targets. The US says this latest round of military operations is all about forcing Iran to give up its stranglehold over the Strait of Hormuz and to stop it from attacking ships. But so far, that is not working. Iran seems to have as tight a grip on the strait as it did during the height of the war in March and early April. It seems as if there were more ship attacks in the last 12 hours, and Iran did once again attack Gulf Arab states and also Jordan, and it's been doing that pretty much nightly. Every time the US strikes, Iran shortly afterwards counter-strikes by hitting places such as Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. So at the moment, neither side looks like it's going to budge over Hormuz. That is what the sort of central focus of the war is now, and the peace talks over Iran's nuclear program are effectively completely stalled, and the sides aren't going forward on that, and I don't think they can until they sort out something over Hormuz.
And so, Paul, looking ahead, the New York Times is reporting the US sending more warplanes to the Middle East. Where does the war go from here? Is further escalation inevitable now?
I think there's a very good chance of further escalation, and Donald Trump did say this last week. I think it was on Wednesday, where he essentially said that the US was going to escalate each night, bit by bit, until Iran relents on the Strait of Hormuz. He said the US would start attacking more bridges, which has already happened. He said that energy sites in Iran would come last. He implied that this would be a very heavy week of bombing of Iran if it didn't back down on the Strait, which of course it hasn't. So yes, escalation looks very likely. We do have to note though, energy markets are reacting to all this. Brent crude is now back above $90 a barrel. That is something that Trump might bear in mind. He doesn't, gasoline prices in the US, pump prices are back to $4 a gallon. This is not good for him. That might make him a little bit wary of escalation, but at the same time, he might feel that he needs escalation to end this sooner rather than sticking to a situation where there's sort of low-level hostilities for months on end.
Okay, Bloomberg's Paul Wallace, thank you so much for the update there. Now, to some other top stories we're following for you around the world this morning. At least one person was killed and 16 wounded overnight in what Ukraine has described as Russia's largest ballistic missile barrage on Kyiv since the invasion began. Ukraine's foreign minister said around 4 dozen missiles targeted the capital overnight. The attack followed Ukrainian strikes on Russian logistics facilities that authorities said killed at least 7 people. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is reportedly considering replacing the country's armed forces commander-in-chief. The move, reported by the Financial Times, comes days after Zelensky fired his defence minister, whose dismissal sparked a backlash. Well, coming up on Daybreak Europe, we'll get another perspective on incoming UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham, with the Cebr CEO Nina Skero joining us. Stay with us, this is Bloomberg. Live from Downing Street, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe as we await Andy Burnham to walk through the door behind me as the UK's next Prime Minister. I'm Lizzie Burden and these are your top stories. Andy Burnham's promise of hope and unity. The new UK PM is set to deliver a message of optimism from Downing Street today, but questions remain over policy priorities and the makeup of his cabinet. Meanwhile, Brent climbs above $90 a barrel as the US and Iran exchange fresh strikes, tensions escalating after the deaths of US troops in the region. And Ryanair earnings are a miss, and as we watch the Farnborough air show, the race for aircraft orders heats up. We'll be hearing from the Boeing CEO later on this morning. Well, a very good morning if you are just joining us. 6:30 a.m. here in London, and we begin in the cross-asset picture as the US-Iran attacks escalate. Oil, as you can see on the left side of the screen, above $90 a barrel now for Brent, jumping to its highest in more than a month. Bonds falling on the renewed inflation concerns. Japan on holiday, by the way, today, so no trading cash treasuries, but you're looking at the long end of the Aussie yield curve here, and the dollar trading in a tight range as well. Now flip over to the stock picture, and we're mostly treading water, not much doing for European futures as things stand. Let's take a look at the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, now in the red, down 0.3%, dragged down by the Kospi after Friday's holiday, but Nasdaq futures and S&P E-minis just in the green here, a slight bounce back after Friday's sell-off. Well, we are in Downing Street this morning. Andy Burnham set to become Britain's Prime Minister, so of course we'll keep a keen eye on the pound and gilt throughout the day. But he's inheriting a cascade of challenges that have felled his predecessors. With little time to make his mark, outstanding questions remain about who will be in his cabinet and the policy direction that he'll pursue. I'm joined now by Lucy White, Bloomberg's UK politics reporter, with me here in Downing Street. Lucy, good morning.
Good morning.
What's in Burnham's in tray then as he takes over and walks through that black door?
Well, we've got all of the things that he's promised to look at so far. So that includes things like transport, devolution, social care, giving a bit more breathing room to the middle classes and people who are struggling with the cost of living. And then we've got, all of this is his ultimate aim with all of this is to grow the economy. That's why we've had stagnating growth for many years now in the UK. The problem that Burnham is going to face is that he has committed to sticking with Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules, and that he has committed to sticking with Labour's 2024 manifesto as well. So the amount of room he's going to have to actually do anything is tricky. Yeah, he's promising a lot.
Yeah, so whoever he picks as Chancellor will be in that bind. The front runner, as we know, is Mahmood. What would a Mahmood appointment tell us not only about his economic plans but his political direction as well?
Well, the thing about Shabana Mahmood is that from an economic perspective, she's very much a blank slate. No one really knows exactly where she's coming from with this. The other frontrunner for the job, of course, was Ed Miliband. He was widely seen as a sort of tax and spend chancellor. Mahmood, who has come up with some very strict immigration reforms, is possibly seen as a little bit more fiscally conservative, but that is very much untested so far.
Yeah, a blank slate is a nice way of putting no Treasury experience, isn't it? But look, when it comes to Starmer's speech today, because we'll get that before Burnham's, what do you think will be his tone? Do you think that he'll show any remorse? Because last time we were here, there wasn't much of it.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see a huge amount of remorse. I think we'll probably see him talking up some of his achievements again, the geopolitical agenda that he's been working towards, obviously with Iran, with Ukraine. We saw him take a trip to Ukraine for the sort of last moment in his premiership last week. So I think he'll be very much, kind of talking up those high points while perhaps ignoring some of the low points that have ended up seeing him kicked out of office.
Of course, there's a reason that he's not going to be the Prime Minister anymore. For now, Lucy, thank you so much. I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead of you. That's our Bloomberg UK politics and economics correspondent, Lucy White. Now, let's turn to that economic picture specifically. We can bring in Nina Skero, CEO of Cebr, the Centre for Economics and Business Research. She joins us now from the London studio. Nina, good morning. Just talk us through what sort of inheritance Burnham will be receiving from Starmer when it comes to the economic and fiscal picture.
He is in a very tight space right from the get-go, from day one. So undoubtedly he'll be wanting to make a mark, get in a few speeches, a few announcements before the summer break. and then to set the stage going into the autumn budget. But as you've just been discussing, it's a very tight space, and anything that he wants to do, he needs to find the resources for, and that is a very tight picture. Something that I don't envy him for is that anything he wants to finance, he will need to find that budget, and he's looking at a picture of higher inflationary assumptions than would have been the case just several months ago, which means higher interest rates and even more tight room.
Indeed, that's what we report. The forecasts will show today when Treasury officials present to him that it could be $150 a barrel for oil in a worst case scenario because of the Iran war. Nina, I wonder what you make of Shabana Mahmood for Chancellor. Is there anyone else that the markets would have preferred?
Who would have made a better Chancellor long-term out of the two names that we've heard were seriously considered, Al Miliband and Shabana Mahmood? I couldn't tell you who would do a better job in the long term. What I can say is who's going to make the new Prime Minister's life easier between today and the budget. It is Shabana Mahmood, which is why now I am, like many people, expecting that that's the name we'll hear imminently. And the reason that is, I think markets, although we don't know much on her policy stance, she is considered somebody who is sensible, perhaps less ideologically driven, somebody who's going to be a safe, competent pair of hands, and also somebody who is going to drive and stabilize inflationary expectations so at least they don't go higher than they already are. So in that sense, that will sort of that mechanic of markets aren't going to price in higher inflation from more spending. Therefore, there'll be a little bit more fiscal headroom come budget time. In that sense, that appointment is going to make his life easier in the coming months.
OK, but we did hear from Burnham on a podcast last week saying that he might at some point have to ask for a little more when it comes to taxes. Can the economy afford that when you've already got taxes heading towards a post-war high?
I really worry what he means by that he's going to have to ask a little bit more. I think in terms of market reactions, what is very well accepted by everyone, including the new Prime Minister or the soon-to-be Prime Minister, is that if there are unfunded spending plans, the markets will react very, very badly to that. What is a bigger and more complex question is to what extent are markets going to tolerate any significant announcements at the budget that taxes are going to go higher? Are markets going to say, okay, well, this makes the fiscal arithmetic on paper look good, but at this point, from this high level, this is going to be damaging to growth. It's going to be further damaging to investment. So I'm very cautious with that. Perhaps if I were to look for a little bit of encouragement in what we've heard so far from Andy Burnham is there has been this news on the digital IDs being scrapped and finding savings there to finance other priorities. Without going into that details of that policy specifically, at least it is encouraging to hear the new Prime Minister say that he acknowledges he needs to find funding from giving up on some priorities to finance other rather than just taxing more altogether.
Well, you mentioned growth. Burnham's talked a lot about devolution. Is that really going to move the needle economically when it comes to the economic growth and productivity we so desperately need in the UK?
I don't think this is going to be a quick win, but if it is done properly, it is actually something I am optimistic on long term. The key bit is regions can't just have more autonomy in terms of how they spend. They need to have their hands on both sides of the equation. And by that, I mean they need to be able to retain more of the proceeds, more of the revenues raised locally, because that's going to incentivize local leaders to be more realistic, to be more growth-minded, to be less blocking in terms of nationwide efforts. But this is not going to be a quick win. It's definitely going to be a multi-year effort because it's a very, very fundamental change to how things are done in the UK at the moment. So if you're going to actually get to that place, if it can be implemented properly, if you do give local areas more control over what's done with revenues, they're going to be motivated to generate those revenues. So it's something that I actually look at rather favorably, but the proof will be in the pudding. This isn't the first leader. You know, we've had the Northern Powerhouse. We've had some way, shape or form of trying to encourage the leaders. Nobody has gone far enough. If Andy Burnham can get it done, I actually think think, a few years down the line, this can be a source of growth.
Yeah, we've heard about levelling up, of course, as well under Boris Johnson. So just finally, Nina, if you were advising Andy Burnham, what would you say are the biggest risks he needs to watch out for economically in the first few months in office?
Well, what we haven't heard him say much on, we've heard him talk about fairness. We've heard about asking people to give a little more. I think when he talks about fairness, he also needs to ask himself, are other parts of the economy fair at the moment? Do people have the right incentives to work? Is there enough being done on the inactivity rate? And those are sort of less popular, more prickly issues to talk about. So when he is talking about fairness, I would just encourage him to not think of fairness as taxing more to then spend more, but actually to have a more holistic view of fairness, to look at the most difficult questions of what is happening with the welfare system, what is happening with the exceptionally high debt and the bills that the UK is paying on that debt, and to not shy away those, because this is actually the best time to do unpopular things. He's just coming through the door later today. He has some goodwill behind him. He's still probably years away from the next election. So if he needs to make tough choices, it's actually better to do them now in these early days of his premiership.
All right, we'll tell him that then, Nina. Now's the time to be brave. He'll never be as popular as he is today, history suggests. For now, Nina Skero, Cebr CEO, thank you very much. We'll get you back in a few months, I'm sure, to mark Andy Burnham's homework. But coming up, we are live at the Farnborough Air Show, the International Air Show, with our very own Guy Johnson. And we'll be finding out what to expect from the event from Guy next. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
The conflict in the Middle East was the key mover of the numbers year on year, where we saw some consumer hesitancy. That led to closer in bookings and lower fares.
Okay. That was the Ryanair CFO Neil Sorahan speaking to us earlier on Daybreak Europe. And of course, it comes before a major event in the air industry calendar today. The Farnborough International Air Show kicking off. Guy Johnson is on the ground for us. Guy, good morning. What are you watching out for on the civil aviation side of things? Let's start there.
Well, let's start and pick up from what Neil was just saying in terms of the stories surrounding the civil side, the consumer side. Everybody's watching at this show to see what impact the higher oil prices are going to have. This conflict is ongoing. It is having a material impact in terms of the airline's profitability. Ryanair have shown that once again this morning. So does that start to translate into a little bit of caution when it comes to the airlines? I suspect at this show probably not. I think you're going to see some significant orders coming through for both Airbus and Boeing. That traditional rivalry is certainly going to be represented here. And the economy largely looks good, particularly over in the United States, where demand continues to look strong. But this wrinkle of higher oil prices and what it's going to mean for the consumer is something that I think a lot of people here are going to be paying attention to, Lizzie, and they're going to watch to see whether or not we start to see some early impacts of that coming through in terms of aircraft orders. The flip side of that is that the airlines will want the most fuel-efficient aircraft. Will they want to place orders, though, when they don't have, though, some certainty surrounding what demand is going to look like? I think that's the key tension that we're going to be watching out for.
So that's the civil side, Guy. What's the picture for military aviation?
So I think this is, Lizzie, actually where things get really interesting. Remember, normally there are kind of two big events in the UK. There's Farnborough and there's a military kind of version of Farnborough, which was cancelled this year. So a really big focus this year at Farnborough in terms of what is happening on the military front. Over the last few years, military defence has played second fiddle to the civil side. That is no longer the case. We've got this huge ramp up taking place in Europe right now. We've obviously got the conflict in Ukraine. Obviously what's happening in Iran is catching attention as well. So everybody's trying to work out whether the Europeans can rebuild their defence footprint, rebuild the infrastructure that they need without the Americans. And that's going to be the really interesting tension that happens here. What role will the American primes, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, etc., play in that build-out? I think is going to be a key question that everybody's looking for. The Europeans want to do it with as much European kit as they can. Can they get all the way? Can Europe defend itself without the Americans.
And Boeing's logo is just over your shoulder, Guy. You're going to be speaking to the Boeing CEO later on today. What do investors need to hear?
So we've got numbers coming up very shortly from Boeing. I think that will be obviously the focus in a couple of weeks' time. But here at the air show, Kelly Ortberg's first air show, first Farnborough that he's going to be at. He's been in post around 2 years. He obviously took over a company that was in a certain amount of crisis, but he's stabilised the ship. He's been here for 2 years. The share price has ticked up very, very nicely. So what does he do next? He's looking to get sort of back on the front foot. He's looking maybe to challenge Airbus in a way that Boeing hasn't for the last few years. How is he going to do that? I think is going to be a key question. Can he get more Maxes out of the factory? The 737. What can he do on the 787 and the XXX? Those are key questions as well. But Boeing again has this big military side. What does he see the story looking like when it comes to Europe? How is Boeing going to play a part in that role, that build-out that we're going to be seeing here in Europe? So some really interesting questions, I think, for Kelly Ortberg. But I also think there's a kind of AI question, a robotics question. There's lots of things going on that we're going to talk to him about very, very shortly. That interview coming up just after 9 o'clock, Lizzie.
Really looking forward to that conversation. Guy Johnson in his element at the Farnborough International Air Show. Thank you very much. Well, we have comprehensive coverage throughout the day. Guy's going to be speaking to the biggest players in the industry, including, as he mentioned, Boeing's CEO Kelly Ortberg, but also Airbus's CEO Guillaume Faury. So don't miss those conversations. Well, turning to some other top corporate news this morning, TSMC raised its 2026 capital expenditure guidance to a record $60 to $64 billion and pledged an additional $100 billion in US investment. CFO Wendell Huang spoke to Bloomberg's chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel in Taipei about routes to fund those ambitions.
Our fundamental belief is that we should be able to self-sustain using our operating cash flow to support the capex and leave enough free cash flow to return cash to shareholder through a sustainable and steadily increasing cash dividends, which we have been doing that in the past several years. We have very good track record of it. Now, from time to time, we can go out to the market, to the bond market, if the timing is right. We've been doing it. We've done a $30 billion fundraising in bond market a few years back, about half of it in US dollar, half of it in NT. NT is very cheap funding for us. US dollar is becoming more and more expensive, so we'll see if the timing is correct. If the timing is right, we do not rule out that we can go to the bond market again.
Well, given what you just laid out, would maybe a mix of more NT dollar denominated bonds be more likely? Or yields too high?
NT dollar bond market is much shallower than the US dollar bond market, so it has its limitations.
The TSMC CFO Wendell Huang speaking there in Taipei. And coming up on the programme, we're going to bring it right back here to Downing Street. Andy Burnham becomes the new UK Prime Minister today with an immediate foreign policy test ahead as US strikes on Iran continue. More on that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We are here on Downing Street as Andy Burnham prepares to become the next UK Prime Minister. And the resumption of US strikes against Iran has thrust him into a potential day one decision on just how far to back the United States military campaign. Let's get more now with Rosa Prince, our Bloomberg opinion columnist. We can talk about the in-tray for Andy Burnham. Rosa, we know that he tends to be a bit of a people pleaser, Andy Burnham. That's at least the attack line the Conservatives have honed in on. Who's likely to be the most and first disappointed by our new PM?
Yeah, you're right. You know, he's had a very short run-up to entering number 10 Downing Street. And during that, he's been able to sort of project whatever anyone who's listening wants to hear. Now that comes to an end, he's actually going to have to make some quite difficult choices Today, that's about who's going to be in his cabinet, so some big political beasts are going to be disappointed. But if we zoom out more broadly, things like tax and spend. He's said he wants to do quite a lot. Everything has to be paid for. Is he going to be raising taxes? I think that's the first big question. And then every policy decision comes with a choice. We hear he's going to be a bit more bullish on North Sea oil and gas. That'll disappoint some in the Greens. Other questions like compensation for the WASPy women, for example, just to throw out one. He said he thought he could give them some compensation, and then he rode quite quickly back on it. So, yeah, all sorts of disappointments coming. And I think the big question for him is how he manages that, how he doesn't give an impression of letting people down and betraying those promises.
Well, you mentioned the North Sea oil and gas. Donald Trump's leapt on that, praising Burnham already. What do you think his relationship with the White House is going to be like?
I'm going to be fascinated to watch this. Keir Starmer was quite supplicant. He seemed to take a bit of a back seat. Andy Burnham has much more main character energy. I can't imagine him taking a back seat in the way that Keir Starmer did.
Well, he's going to be up front. What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Is he going to, really defy Donald Trump? That doesn't seem like it would be a good idea for the special relationship. On the other hand, we've also heard Burnham say he's not as interested in foreign policy. He wants to focus here on the domestic. A lot of prime ministers say that when they go into Downing Street, and then it ends up you're caught up in the world of summits and bilaterals, and that comes to a screeching halt.
Yeah, they want to do that, but can they? Look, history suggests that Burnham's never going to be as popular he is when he walks through that black door. When do you expect him to call an election, and crucially, can he win it?
Yeah, really good question. As you say, now would be a great time. He's up in the polls. Reform UK, who have been leaving, seem to be stumbling a little. The Conservatives haven't recovered. My guess, though, is that he'll feel he needs to have some achievements under his belt before he calls an election. He doesn't have to do that for 3 years. I would look more like 1 year, perhaps 2 years into it before he actually goes to the polls. But a big question I think everyone will be obsessing about for the next few months.
Rosa, thank you so much. That's Rosa Prince, our Bloomberg opinion columnist. You can find Rosa's columns at OPIN Go on the terminal. But that does it for Daybreak Europe. The opening trade's coming up next. We're going to be staying here live from Downing Street throughout the day. We'll bring you all coverage of Andy Burnham preparing to head through that famous door behind me. Keir Starmer's out. Burnham's coming in. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.